Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. I am Dr. Sarwat Rasool and our today's session is a continuation of Book 1, chapters 11 to 18 of the novel Joseph Andrews. Like the previous session, we would cover story, text, and we would do a critical analysis of the selected chapters. Before I move forward, I would like to share with you a review of the previous session. In the previous session, we covered chapters 1 to 10 from Book 1. We looked at the headings of these chapters, important summary points and discussion points were considered, and some important parts of the text with reference to the development of themes, of the development of characters, as well as the development of the plot itself were presented and discussed. Through these first 10 chapters of Book 1, the characters are established by Fielding. We saw the protagonist, Joseph Andrews, moving through the years, becoming a grown-up adult, handsome young boy. And we also saw the characters of Lady Booby and Slipslop in details, and we saw how the themes of affectation that have the causes of vanity and hypocrisy as a source of ridiculous, how their threads were run through the text in these 10 chapters. With this, we move on to today's session, and as far as the current session is concerned, from chapter 11 onwards, we would cover Book 1 in this session. Again, we would look at the headings of chapters, the same procedure of looking at the summaries and points of discussion, as well as exploring important parts of text with reference to themes and development of characters would be done. So here we go with chapter 11 and its heading as it is given in Book 1. The heading is given here in red color, of several new matters not expected. So by giving this heading, actually Fielding prepares the reader that the reader is going to be introduced to a lot of new things. It is also to be noted that the generalized nature of this heading gives hints to the nature of the chapter itself, that is again much generalized, and maybe it would not contribute a lot towards the development of the plot itself. Here is the opening text that is quoted from paragraph 2 of this chapter. Fielding says, "Since it may be wondered at first that Joseph made such extraordinary haste out of town, which hath been already shown, and secondly, which will be now shown, that instead of proceeding to the habitation of his father and mother, or to his beloved sister Pamela, he chose rather to set out full speed to the Lady Booby's country seat, which he had left on his journey to London." Text continues on this slide as well. "Be it known then that in the same parish where this seat stood, there lived a young girl whom Joseph, though the best of sons and brothers, longed more impatiently to see than his parents or his sister. She was a poor girl who had formerly been bred up in Sir John's family. Whence a little before the journey to London, she had been discarded by Mrs. Slipslop on account of her extraordinary beauty, for I never could find any other reason." Here I stands for Fielding, the omnipresent, omniscient writer. "This young creature, who now lived with a farmer in the parish, had been always beloved to Joseph and returned his affection. She was 2 years only younger than our hero." So we are introduced the female protagonist character, that is of Fanny, who is the beloved of Joseph. They had been acquainted from their infancy and had conceived a very early liking for each other, which had grown to such a degree of affection that Mr. Adams had with much ado prevented them from marrying and persuaded them to wait until a few years' service and thrift had a little improved their experience and enabled them to live comfortably together. And of course they took the advice of Adams. Anyhow, the text continues. The reader may perhaps wonder that so fond a pair should, during a 12 months' absence, never converse with one another. Indeed, there was but one reason which did or could have prevented them, and this was that poor Fanny could neither write nor read. Nor could she be prevailed upon to transmit the delicacies of her tender and chaste passion by the hands of an amanuensis. So he would not like somebody stranger to write her feelings, and she herself could not write a letter. This is what Fielding provides us as information and a justification for why, after all, there was no contact between the hero Joseph Andrews and Fanny, his beloved, during his stay in London. Since it is not possible to read and then discuss the whole chapter and all the text, so I would just point out some important summary points from this chapter, that is chapter 11. Joseph heads back to Lady Booby's country seat, where he will meet his beloved Fanny Goodwill. Again, Goodwill is a part of her name, and I would refer back to the fact that Fielding, as a writer, very craftily uses names as symbols or signs to indicate the nature or the characteristics of a particular character. Joseph and Fanny have known each other since early life, as I have said earlier, and have long desired to marry, though they have taken Mr. Adams' advice in putting off the day until a few years' service and thrift will have augmented both their experience and their finances. Here, as a moralist, Fielding promotes the institution of marriage, and he shows his belief in the long-term relationship. They have not been in contact for the past many years for the simple reason that Fanny is illiterate and Joseph is forced by a hailstorm to take shelter in an inn belonging to a man called Plain Tim. When the storm is over, Joseph continues on his way with another traveler who was also stopped at the inn by the storm. So you can see that there is not much development in terms of the plot in this chapter. With this we come to chapter 12, and here is the heading of chapter 12 that runs as follows: containing many surprising adventures which Joseph Andrews met with on the road, scarce credible to those who have never travelled in a stagecoach. So again, through this heading that is given, we are told that something surprising, something very adventurous is going to be presented by Fielding in this chapter. And here is the summary of chapter 12 from book 1. Joseph and his companion reach another inn at about 2 o'clock in the morning. Remember, Joseph started his journey at 7 in the evening last day. Because of a hailstorm, he stopped at an inn for a while and then continued his journey again. Now, by 2 o'clock in the morning, he and his companion, the other man who stayed there at the first inn, they reach another inn. The other man stays at the inn for the night while Joseph proceeds on foot. So now he is left alone. In this chapter, a very important happening takes place that would throw light on a lot of themes, the main themes of the novel as well. Joseph is robbed on the way. He is stripped, robbed, beaten unconscious and thrown into a ditch by 2 thieves on the way. A stagecoach comes, and after much argument amongst the selfish travellers, Joseph is lent a coat and lifted into the coach. The shallowness of the travellers is further emphasized when the coach is stopped by the thieves, but when they eventually reach an inn, Joseph is met with true kindness from a maid, who again comes, you see, because she's a maid, she comes from the lower class, and who seats him by the fire while she makes up a bed for him. She tries to hasten along the surgeon so that she could provide some first aid to Joseph, who promptly returns to bed when he hears that the injured person is a mere foot passenger. So the selfishness of the surgeon again is an indication of the heartlessness of the upper class people, that on listening that the injured person is a foot passenger, because the surgeon does not anticipate much money, so he retires to his bed again and does not want to come to see the patient. In the morning, the master of the inn, that is Mr. Tawus, orders Betty. Betty is the maid who serves at their inn. He orders Betty to give Joseph one of Mr. Tawus' own shirts. Now Mrs. Tawus, when she comes to know about this, she objects to this proceeding, however, and rebukes both her husband and the servant girl. The little-heartedness of the hard-heartedness of Tawus, Mrs. Tawus, is very, very clear here, that she does not allow her husband to give his shirt to this injured person, that is Joseph. While Mr. and Mrs. Tawus are arguing, Betty gives Joseph a shirt that is of the hostler. Now again the help comes from the lower class. In this chapter, the surgeon also visits Joseph and pronounces his wounds likely to lead towards his death. So that was the summary of chapter 12, but this chapter is very important. It is considered to be one of those very important chapters that project Fielding's moral philosophy, his major themes, and his concept of religion, etc. So I have selected a few extracts of text from this chapter to provide you insights into this coach incident that took place there. The poor wretch, who lay motionless a long time, just began to recover his senses as a stagecoach came by. अब Joseph, जो कि जख्मी हो गया हुआ था, he was left there by the robbers. They stripped off his clothes, took all the money away. He was completely robbed. As he recovered his senses, he noticed that a coach was coming. The postilion, hearing a man's groans, stopped his horses. The man who was driving the coach stopped the horses when he heard the groans or the cries of a man, and told the coachman he was certain there was a dead man lying in the ditch, for he heard him groan. और उसने कोचवान को बताया कि that he heard the cries of somebody. Go on, Sarah, says the coachman. We are confounded late and have no time to look after dead men. Fielding criticizes, he shows a mirror to the selfishness and the hard-heartedness of people. A lady who heard what the postilion said and likewise heard the groan called eagerly to the coachman to stop and see what was the matter. Upon which he bid the postilion alight and look into the ditch. He did so and returned that there was a man sitting upright, as naked as ever he was born. Oh, Jesus, cried the lady, a naked man? Dear coachman, drive on and leave him. Again, the theme of pretension, the theme of affectation. The lady is not interested in saving the life of the boy. What she is interested in is to save her fake reputation as a chaste lady who would take care of her chastity and her virtue, who cannot face a naked man. Anyhow, the text continues. Upon this the gentleman got out of the coach, and Joseph begged them to have mercy upon him, for that he had been robbed and almost beaten to death. Robbed? Cries an old gentleman. Let us make all the haste imaginable, or we shall be robbed too. Dear students, you need to notice the selfishness of these characters. Out of the fear that they too may not be robbed, they are not ready to help this boy, this poor young man who is at the moment naked, has nothing, everything is robbed off, and he is poorly beaten as well. A young man who belonged to the law answered, he wished they had passed by without taking any notice, but that now they might be proved to have been last in his company. If he should die, they might be called to some account for his murder. He therefore thought it advisable to save the poor creature's life for their own sakes, if possible. At least if he died, to prevent the jury's finding that they fled for it. He was therefore of opinion to take the man into the coach and carry him to the next inn. Notice the level of selfishness. The lawyer who is sitting in the coach advises that the that poor Joseph should be allowed to be taken into the coach, and he should be taken along, because if he dies there, then law would at least check, and the state would find out that they were the last people who passed by and who did not help him. So just for their own sake, for the sake of their own safety, if at all they are going to help Joseph, it is for their own safety. As I said earlier, while I was introducing Henry Fielding, I mentioned his career as a magistrate and his degree in law. So whether it helped him in his profession as a magistrate or not, it definitely helped him, and it is reflected in his writings. And this is one of the examples here, the reference to the lawyer. The text continues. The lady insisted that he should not come into the coach, that if they lifted him in, she would herself alight, for she had rather stay in that place to all eternity than ride with a naked man. The coachman objected that he could not suffer him to be taken in unless somebody would pay a shilling for his carriage the 4 miles. अब हर एक को अपनी फिक्र है. The lady doesn't want him to be in the coach because he is naked, and she thinks she is a very virtuous lady. The coachman doesn't want him to be in the coach because he wants payment to be made for his travelling. Anyhow, which the 2 gentlemen refused to do, but the lawyer, who was afraid of some mischief happening to himself if the wretch was left behind in that condition, saying no man could be too cautious in these matters, and that he remembered very extraordinary cases in the books, threatened the coachman and bid him deny taking him up at his peril, for that if he died he should be indicated for his murder, and if he lived and brought an action against him, he would willingly take a brief in it. So the lawyer forced the coachman, again for the selfish purposes, to allow Joseph to sit in the coach. Coming towards the points of discussion with reference to chapter 12, I would say that this coach episode is very important, and it underpins Fielding's theme of charity. While Joseph shows concern for the clothes he has borrowed, only one of the travellers displays any real compassion for Joseph's naked and battered state. Everybody is bothered about his or her own motives and benefits. The coachman thinks of his own schedule and his fear. The lady affects shock at the thought of a naked man. The old gentleman wants to make haste to avoid being robbed himself, and the lawyer is worried only by the possible legal repercussions. Overall, the theme of selfishness and ingratitude is prevalent. Only the postilion feels truly concerned and compassionate, and thinks he would rather ride in his shirt all his life than suffer a fellow creature to lie in so miserable a condition. And what you need to notice is that again postilion here is a representative of the lower class. Moving on with the discussion points, I would say that Fielding's aside that this man was later transported in his way of commenting on a society which would so harshly condemn a chicken thief. As far as the other travellers are concerned, they are selfish and hypocritical, and when the stagecoach is robbed, Fielding satirizes the lady who carries Nantes in her water bottle and the lawyer who is brave after the event. Here Fielding as a satirist emerges and comments on the corrupt moral conditions of these people. This foreshadows the case of the man who is brave before the event in book 2 chapter 9 that you would come across later. On that occasion, it is Adams who is truly brave, just as in this episode Joseph knocks down one of the robbers while being attacked from behind himself. Despite the barbed portrayal of hypocrisy in this section, one remembers Fielding's qualification in the preface. The vices to be found here are rather the accidental consequences of some human frailty and foible. Fielding, as a moralist, believed that the vices actually sometimes are just because of the consequences that happen accidentally, where human beings fall weak. And in this case, you can see that, especially when he presents the two people from the lower class, the postilion and the coachman. In the case of the coachman, maybe his frailty or his weakness is because of the consequences or because of the accidental situations. I have already discussed with you, my dear students, the important themes of this work. However, at this point, this theme of warmth and humanity versus cruelty emerges in this episode. Amongst this imperfection, Joseph finds warmth and humanity, and no doubt that the maid Betty, who works at the inn, and Mrs. Tavus, who and Mr. Tavus, who offers to give his own shirt, are not perfect creatures, but their kindness to Joseph contrasts strongly with the behavior of the surgeon and with Mrs. Tavus. Goodness, warmth and humanity are prominent features of their characters, though I would say these characters are not completely flawless. Another important thing that is to be noticed here is the name of Mrs. Tavus' inn. The name of Mrs. Tavus' inn. Mrs. Tavus' inn is aptly named the Dragon Inn. This and the collection of hypocrites who come to the inn contrast with the sign of the lion, that magnanimous beast found on the inn. The theme of charity and good nature in relation to the selfish economics of everyday life is projected again by Fielding, and actually Fielding continues to carry this theme throughout Joseph Andrews. With this, we move on to chapter 13, and in chapter 13, if first we would look at the heading that states, what happened to Joseph during his sickness at the inn, with the curious discourse between him and Mr. Barnabas, the parson of the parish. So again, we are told what is going to be presented in this chapter, that is Joseph's stay at the inn and some important conversations there. This is the opening text of chapter 13, that is paragraph 1 of the text that I have copied here. As soon as Joseph had communicated a particular history of the robbery, together with a short account of himself and his intended journey, he asked the surgeon if he apprehended him to be in any danger, to which the surgeon very honestly answered, he feared he was, for that his pulse was very exalted and feverish, and if his fever should prove more than symptomatic, it would be impossible to save him. Joseph, fetching a deep sigh, cried, "Poor Fanny, I could have lived to see thee, but God's will be done." So what we notice is that in that state of distress, Joseph is thinking about Fanny, and still he believes that God's will be done, and he is contented with that. Some more text from chapter 3 continues as following. Joseph desired paper and pens to write a letter, but they were refused him, and he was advised to use all his endeavors to compose himself. They then left him, and Mr. Tavus sent to a clergyman to come and administer his good offices to the soul of poor Joseph, since the surgeon despaired of making any successful applications to his body. अच्छा, अब हर रिलीजन की अपनी प्रैक्टिसेस होती हैं. दिस इज अ प्रैक्टिस इन क्रिश्चियनिटी दैट पीपल वुड कन्फेस in front of clergymen. So because the surgeon has announced that Joseph is not going to survive, Mr. Tavus sends a message for a clergyman so that he could see Joseph. The surgeon despairs of Joseph's recovery, so Mr. Tavus sends for a clergyman, as I have said earlier. So the name of this clergyman is Mr. Barnabas, who first drinks tea with the landlady and then a bowl of punch with the landlord before going up to see Joseph. Joseph doesn't feel well. He talks to himself about Fanny, but he leaves everything to God. Here again is an instance of text where he is maybe talking to himself. Oh, most adorable Pamela, most virtuous sister, whose examples could alone enable me to withstand all the temptations of riches and beauty, and to preserve my virtue pure and chaste for the arms of my dear Fanny, if it had pleased heaven that I should ever have come unto them. What riches or honors or pleasures can make us amends for the loss of innocence? Doth not that alone afford us more consolation than all worldly acquisitions? What but innocence and virtue could give any comfort to such a miserable wretch as I am? Yet these can make me prefer this sick and painful bed to all the pleasures I should have found in my ladies. So through this soliloquy, through this talking to himself, as Joseph does this, actually Fielding has presented his ideas as a moralist to the reader, and here Joseph actually works as a mouthpiece of Fielding. Anyhow, in this chapter we notice that Barnabas considers all this rhapsody of nonsense. Later, when he finally talks with Joseph, his Christian admonitions to forget all carnal affections, that is about Fanny, and to forgive everyone, that is the thieves, sound rather hollow. Again, we can see Fielding, who makes fun of the religious practices sometimes, and instead of believing in the religious practices, he more believes in real virtue. Barnabas is more interested in another punch for himself, while the good-natured Betty brings Joseph some tea, which already has been refused by Mrs. Tawus because she is not ready to serve it. Since this point, I have already referred to Fielding's objections to the religious practices and his concept of religion. Here is some text that I have quoted from this chapter that shows how Fielding questions religion and religious practices. Here is the text. He then questioned him concerning his forgiveness. Now he here is Barnabas, the clergyman who comes there and talks to Joseph. So he questioned him concerning his forgiveness of the thieves. Joseph answered, he feared that was more than he could do, for nothing would give him more pleasure than to hear they were taken. That, cries Barnabas, is for the sake of justice. Yes, said Joseph, but if I was to meet them again, I am afraid I should attack them and kill them too, if I could. Doubtless, answered Barnabas, it is lawful to kill a thief, but can you say you forgive them as a Christian ought? Joseph desired to know what that forgiveness was. That is, answered Barnabas, to forgive them it is to forgive them as, in short, it is to forgive them as a Christian. So when as a representative of religion or of as a representative of church, he asks Joseph to forgive everybody and to forgive these thieves especially before he dies. Joseph doesn't understand that, and he says that if it would be possible, he would like them to be caught, and if he ever comes across them again, he would like to attack them. Answering this, Barnabas says that still he wants him to forgive these thieves, which Joseph cannot completely understand, and asks why should he forgive them, to which Barnabas answers in a very, very hesitant tone, because he doesn't have a very strong logical answer for that. To forgive them as, and he hesitates, as, again hesitates, it is to forgive them as, in short, it is to forgive them as a Christian. So he doesn't have a logic for that. Here, Fielding as a moralist and Fielding as critic of the religious practices criticizes this practice and makes fun of it as well. Some important discussion points related to this chapter are following. Mr. Barnabas is one of the many hypocritical clergymen who are a disgrace to clergy. The link between good nature and occupation is important. According to Fielding, disposition demands practical exercise and encouragement. This is what he also believes in. Hence, Adam's office as a clergyman is important because no other office could have given him so many opportunities of displaying his worthy inclinations. If you remember, I have already mentioned this in our discussion on Fielding's preface. There are 6 such clergymen in Joseph Andrews, of whom Barnabas and Trolliber are very prominent examples of all the corruption in clergy or in church. As it has been discussed earlier, Barnabas is more interested in a punch than in his duties, and he knows only the formula of his faith. He does not know the true spirit of that. That is why he cannot give any other answer to Joseph, and he says just to forgive them for the sake of Christianity. His dealings with Joseph are not at all related to Joseph's experience, and this discrepancy or this difference between the formulae and the good works, the actions actually, is one that Fielding has emphasized throughout the novel. Again, it is Betty who reveals a truly charitable heart in bringing Joseph the tea which was too much trouble for Mrs. Stowwoos to prepare. In the novel, help always comes from the poor and goodness is exhibited by unprivileged. We have noticed it in the coach scene as well. We notice here it in the case of Betty again. With this, we move on to chapter 14, that has a heading that runs as follows: being very full of adventures which succeeded each other at the inn. So the heading gives us clues that this chapter is full of different adventures. It is a series of adventures that are related to, you see, his stay at the inn and his journey from there onwards. As far as the summary of chapter 14 from book 1 is concerned, it has following important points. Evening falls and a grave person arrives at the inn. On hearing what has happened to Joseph, he is immediately concerned for Joseph's health and safety amongst all these uncharitable people. And it is important for us to notice as readers that he does not yet know the identity of Joseph. Still, when he comes to know about a stranger who is injured, he is, out of his human and Christian concern for other human beings, he is concerned about this stranger. He inquires of the surgeon, who would rather talk in medical jargon than communicate. Again, pretension, affectation, vanity is shown in the character of the surgeon. But the surgeon is interrupted as one of the thieves has been caught, and to the great joy of Joseph, a little piece of broken gold, that is a memento of Fanny, is found on him. Soon the bundle of clothes stripped from Joseph is also found. The summary continues. The uniform is recognized by the grave gentleman, and we come to know that actually this person, the grave gentleman, is Parson Adams, who recognizes that this uniform is of Joseph Andrews. Meanwhile, the mob that has gathered searches the captive, and the surgeon and Barnabas, that is the clergyman, enter into a dispute as to which parties have the best legal claim to the recovered articles. Again, the self-centered approach, the selfishness of these characters is obvious through this. The prisoner almost gains his freedom by continually protesting his innocence. However, at this point of time, Betty reminds them of the evidence of the piece of gold at which the prisoner is secured for the night. Again, something positive comes from a person, a female character who belongs to the poor class, that is Betty the maid. Apart from Betty, here is another character at the inn, that is of Mrs. Stowwoos. Mrs. Stowwoos is a very, very important female character because it provides again some insights into those threads of themes that run across the whole novel. Here is some part of text that provides us some information about her. I read the text for you. Her person was short, thin and crooked. Her forehead projected in the middle and thence descended in a declivity to the top of her nose, which was sharp and red, and would have hung over her lips had not nature turned up the end of it. Her lips were 2 bits of skin, which whenever she spoke, she drew together in a purse. Her chin was peaked, and at the upper end of that skin, which composed her cheeks, stood two bones that almost hid a pair of small red eyes. Add to this a voice most wonderfully adapted to the sentiments it was to convey, being both loud and hoarse. So this is the character sketch of Mrs. Tawus that Fielding has presented. Just by reading about how it is sketched, the pen sketch that is given of Mrs. Tawus, we can well imagine what kind of a character it would be. And as far as the art of characterization on part of Fielding is concerned, I would say this is a very, very suitable, a very apt example of this mastery. This leads us to the next chapter, that is chapter 15 of book 1, and the heading of this chapter runs as follows. Showing how Mrs. Tawus was a little mollified and how officious Mr. Barnabas and the surgeon were to prosecute the chief, with a dissertation accounting for their zeal and that of many other persons not mentioned in this history. So again we get clues what the chapter is going to be about. My dear students, here is the opening text of chapter 15. Let us read and see what happens. Betty told her mistress she believed the man in bed was a greater man than they took him for besides the extreme whiteness of his skin and the softness of his hands, she observed a very great familiarity between the gentleman and him, and added she was certain they were intimate acquaintance if not relations. This somewhat abated the severity of Mrs. Tawus' countenance. She said, God forbid she should not discharge the duty of a Christian, since the poor gentleman was brought to her house. She had a natural antipathy to vagabonds, but could pity the misfortunes of a Christian as soon as another. Now what we need to notice is, as soon as this owner of the inn, Mrs. Tawus, comes to know that maybe there is a possibility that Joseph Andrews is not only a poor passenger on foot, rather he has some fortune, because Parson Adams is identified as his possible intimate acquaintance. So when this news is given by Betty, suddenly, immediately I would say, Mrs. Tawus changes her stance, and she says, God forbid she should not discharge the duty of a Christian, since the poor gentleman was brought to her house. Ab usko fauran Allah Miyan yaad aa jate hain, and what she says is that in the name of Christianity, she would take care of him. Tawus said, if the traveller be a gentleman, though he hath no money about him now, we shall most likely be paid hereafter. So you may begin to score whenever you will. Mrs. Tawus answered, hold your simple tongue and don't instruct me in my business. I am sure I am sorry for the gentleman's misfortune with all my heart, and I hope the villain who hath used him so barbarously will be hanged. Betty, go see what he wants. God forbid he should want anything in my house. So how she changes her stance, how she changes her attitude towards Joseph can be noticed clearly. Dear students, I have already shared some part of the text from chapter 5. However, it is not possible to go through the whole text during the session. So I would share some important summary points from this chapter. As I have said earlier, Betty tells Mrs. Tawus that Joseph, who appears to know Mr. Adams, may be a greater man than they took for him. Consequently, Mrs. Tawus begins to feel better about having extended charity to him. Mr. Barnabas and the surgeon approach Joseph, wanting to use his gold piece as evidence against the ruffian, but Joseph will not give it up, and Mr. Adams supports him. Again, you can notice the selfish purposes of Barnabas and the surgeon, who are more interested in gold. Parson Adam tells Joseph that he is on his way to London to publish some volumes of sermon. The next morning, Barnabas and the surgeon return to see the thief conveyed before the justice. They have spent the night arguing over legal procedures. Again, the knowledge of law on part of Fielding and his criticism of some legal practices can be noticed here. Fielding concludes the chapter with an apostrophe to vanity, giving comments on vanity, eventually admitting that the reason for this passage is merely to lengthen out a short chapter. This implies that at the end of the chapter he admits that he who is criticizing the vanity of others, he himself has added all these details here only to add to the length of his chapter. Some discussion points related to this summary are that Adam soon perceives that hunger is Joseph's most pressing ailment, and it is the gibberish of the surgeon which is the real example of a rhapsody of nonsense. In legal and other matters, we find that both Barnabas and the surgeon are motivated by vanity rather than by any sense of duty. As I said earlier, they are more interested in gold than in Joseph. This refers back to the theme of vanity that Fielding has dealt with throughout the novel. So their concern is also not only for the gold but for the advertisement of their own assumed abilities rather than for public justice. On the other hand, we can see Adam's perfect simplicity hinted at by the fact that all he knows comes from the books, and actually what he does is he practices it. Parson Adams is presented as simple but a very sincere character. His immediate concern for the plight of the footman, whom he does not know at first to be Joseph, is a proof of this fact, as I discussed earlier, and he is willing to delay his journey, which is important to him and his family, for the sake of Joseph. Another proof of his goodness and sincerity is that he offers to give him his entire fortune of less than 10 shillings that he offers to Joseph. The concern and selflessness is in sheer contrast with the selfish motives that we notice and the selfish change in the attitude of Mrs. Torwoos that we notice. Whereas Adam's sympathies are truly Christian, Mrs. Torwoos considers a person worthy of Christian compassion to be the opposite of vagabond. In other words, a Christian is someone who is likely to be able to pay his bill. So again, financial issues come in and money matters more. Fielding again stresses the theme of getting to the heart of true good nature, and in his concluding remarks on vanity, he stresses the difficulty of penetrating the disguises which vanity tempts people to assume. And he even does not spare himself. His tone mocks even himself, for far from being carried away by his own indignation with his several paragraphs deploring vanity, he confesses that he is really only lengthening out his chapter. And I would say that as a proof of this, I would like you to see the text related to this on the next slide. The text on this slide is the concluding text of chapter 15, where Fielding says, I know thou wilt think that whilst I abuse thee, I court thee, and that thy love hath inspired me to write this sarcastical panegyric on thee. But thou art deceived. I value thee not of a farthing, nor will it give me any pain if thou shouldst prevail on the reader to censure this digression as arrant nonsense. For know to thy confusion that I have introduced thee for no other purpose than to lengthen out a short chapter, and so I return to my history. So very cruelly he mocks himself as well and tells the reader that he has written all this about discussion on vanity and affectation not for the benefit of the reader but for his own benefit, that is to lengthen a chapter that he is writing. With this, we move on to the next chapter, that is chapter 16 of book 1, and its heading runs as follows: The escape of the thief, Mr. Adams's disappointment, the arrival of two very extraordinary personages, and the introduction of Parson Adams to Parson Barnabas. So he actually has given us a summary of all the incidents or events or happenings that take place in this chapter. Here is some important part of the text and some summary points from this chapter. The vain ostentation of Barnabas and the surgeon is in contrast to the thief, who the pair of legal wranglers find on their return has escaped thanks to the carelessness or dishonesty of the constable Tom Suckbribe. Now the question is whether they have really escaped or the constable has taken some bribe and has helped them escape is left to the reader to decide. However, I would say very cleverly Fielding has used Tom Suck Bribe. Suck Bribe is a part of the name of this person, which gives us clues about what would have actually happened. Here is some important part of the text. Mrs. Tawus delivered herself in the following words: "Sure, never was such a fool as my husband. Would any other person living have left a man in the custody of such a drunken, drowsy blockhead as Tom Suck Bribe?" Which was the constable's name. "And if he could be indicted without any harm to his wife and children, I should be glad of it." Then the bell rang in Joseph's room. "Why, Betty, John Chamberlain, where the devil are you? Have you no ears or no conscience not to tend the sick better? See what the gentleman wants. Why don't you go yourself, Mr. Tawus? But anyone may die for you. You have no more feeling than a deal board." What we need to see in this text is, and what we need to notice is, that she had been criticizing her husband for thinking of giving his shirt to Joseph Andrews, and now she is accusing him for the other reason, and she wants him to go and see Joseph, though it is purely for her own again material purposes. Continuing discussion on the summary and important discussion points of this chapter, I would say Adams realizes that Joseph is not well enough to travel that day, so he will require more money. He takes Tawus aside and asks him for 3 guineas, at the same time offering him what he thinks is ample security. So he wants some money to be borrowed, and for that he is going to give some security, but the security turns out to be the sermons. The poor parson does not have anything else to offer as a security for the money that he wants to borrow. So he has only sermons that he offers, and so Tawus hurries off with a "coming sir" to no one in particular. और आप notice करें कि Tawus बहाना बना के वहाँ से चला जाता है, and he doesn't actually is not called by anyone. Anyhow, while Adams takes comfort in his pipe, a coach with 6 passengers arrives at the inn, and the coachman and his master start arguing. It is through one of the footmen of this coach that Barnabas comes to know that Adams is a clergyman. Over a bowl of punch, they discuss Adams' volumes of sermons. Barnabas has had no success with his own and casts doubt on the prospect of Adams making any money by publishing his own sermons. Now Joseph is almost fully recovered, and Adams and he agree to part on their separate ways. That is, Adams to London, where he would sell his sermons, he would publish his sermons, and Joseph to the Booby country seat, where he would like to meet his beloved Fanny. The chapter ends at the point where Joseph retires to his room for rest, while Parson Adam goes down to meet a friend of Mr. Barnabas who has just arrived at the inn. Well, I have already discussed this important discussion point, that is with reference to the name of the constable, Tom Suck Bribe, that indicates that the thief owes his escape to more than the constable's negligence. I would reiterate that many names in this novel, such as Whipwell, Slipslop, Booby, Peter Pounce, Fanny Goodwill, Mrs. Graveairs, etc., all these names refer to general stereotype characteristics of these characters, and they do not actually stand for individuals, rather they stand for types. Later on you would see that Fielding himself emphasizes in the first chapter of book 3 that his characters are types. Mrs. Tawus is as concerned with money as is Tom Suck Bribe, so you could have noticed in the text that her expostulation of feeling is an ironic inversion of real values, and she is very, very much money-minded. Parson Adams, on the other hand, who generously offers Joseph his few shillings, is completely naive about the economics of everyday life. And it is not surprising that he fails to convince Mr. Tawus for the worth of his sermons to be given to him in terms of hard cash. Before we move forward, at this point I would like to share with you use of digressions in the novel by Fielding as a writer. In the novel we notice various digressions or diversions from the main theme as well as the main action. For example, in this chapter, the small incident of the factitious dialogue between the coachman and his master is an example of Fielding's digressions that elsewhere are expanded on a larger scale. In fact, these digressions, as this conversation and the history of Leonora in book 2, they link circles, and the theme of these diversions, such as the casual betting between friends as presented in this chapter, contrasts with the real concern over money shown by Adams on Joseph's behalf. So what I would say is that apparently these are digressions, however they reflect back on the main themes in some ways, and these are actually miniature views of the concerns of this novel or of the novelist. With this we move on to chapter 17 of book 1, and the heading of this chapter runs as follows. A pleasant discourse between the two parsons and the bookseller, which was broke off by an unlucky accident happening in the inn, which produced a dialogue between Mrs. Talvouz and her maid of no gentle kind. So by reading this we are prepared to read what is presented in chapter 17, and here are the important summary points of chapter 17. Adams is happy to know that the friend of Barnabas is a bookseller, because this would help Adams to sell his sermons or to get them published. He proceeds to offer his sermons to Barnabas for publication. The bookseller is met. He says that he dislikes sermons only because they don't sell, and adds that he will take them to London with him. A discussion develops between Adams and Barnabas over the Methodist doctrines of George Whitefield. Barnabas reveals Whitefield because he advocates continual preaching and praying for clergymen rather than more pleasurable pursuits. On the other hand, Adams, though agreeing with Whitefield that the business of clergymen should not be with things which are worldly, strongly criticizes the detestable doctrine of faith against good works. And here I would like to point out that again the main purpose of Fielding for writing this work, that is to point out affectation and to point out that good work, good action in itself is far more valuable than the mere Christian doctrines. This idea is presented here. Again, it is reinforced. On hearing that Adams' sermons inculcate the opposite opinion, that virtuous heathens are more acceptable to God than are vicious Christians, the bookseller immediately backtracks, saying that he will not take on no book which the clergy would be certain to denounce. Talking of the restoration of the true use of Christianity, Adams mentions a book which sets Barnabas to spluttering, though he has read not one syllable of it. Again, pretension on the part of Barnabas can be noticed, and we can also notice the behavior of the bookseller. Here are some parts of or some extracts from the text of chapter 17 that I found important to be shared with you. These are the words of the bookseller. He says, "If it was a play that had been acted 20 nights together, I believe it would be safe." So he is hesitant in publishing the sermons of Parson Adams, and over these sermons he prefers to publish a play because he believes that a play that has been popular, that has been acted 20 nights together, it would be safe to publish it. I am quoting a few words of Parson Adams here, who says, "A virtuous and good Turk or heathen are more acceptable in the sight of their Creator than a vicious and wicked Christian, though his faith was as perfectly orthodox as St. Paul's himself. I wish you success," says the bookseller, "but must beg to be excused, as my hands are so very full at present, and indeed I am afraid you will find a backwardness in the trade to engage in a book which the clergy would be certain to cry down." So he simply outrightly rejects the sermons of Parson Adams by creating excuses that he already has a lot of work to be published. Continuing with book 1, chapter 17, I would say that there are certain happenings in this chapter. Suddenly there is an uproar in the inn as Mrs. Tarwoos has caught her husband with Betty, the chambermaid, and the two women have a huge quarrel over the issue. Mrs. Tarwoos wants to hit Betty with the kitchen spit, but she is restrained by Mr. Adams. Betty, though generous and compassionate, has a constitution composed of those warm ingredients which, though the purity of courts or nunneries might have happily controlled them, were by no means able to endure the ticklish situation of a chambermaid at an inn. And here I would like to point out that Fielding as a moralist and Fielding as a writer who has his fingers on the pulse of society clearly mentions it here, that these are those human follies and foibles that are very difficult to control. Betty, who advanced towards Joseph to an extent that the modest Joseph was forced to shut her out of his room, but on retiring to make Mr. Tarwoos' bed, she came across Mr. Tarwoos himself, and in her heightened state of passion, she submitted to his will. And this is the time point where Mrs. Tarwoos entered the bedroom and Betty is dismissed resultantly. Some important discussion points with reference to this chapter are: number 1, that Adams again reveals his simplicity in financial matters. He explains his poor state in all his honesty to the bookseller, completely undermining his own bargaining position. But the commercial world is not the one in which Adams lives. He states that an honest mind would rather lose money by conveying good instructions to mankind than gain by propagating evil. So we can compare and contrast the themes of simplicity and pretension, the themes of contentedness and of material-mindedness. Again, I would say this chapter is Fielding's criticism on religion and religious practices. Adams' real concerns emerge in his comments on the Methodist doctrine, which puts faith before good works. And Fielding actually criticizes all that. Adams considers that nothing can have a more pernicious influence on society than last-minute repentance, and he believes that active virtue is always more important than faith. In saying all this, he is a mouthpiece of Fielding. This again bears on how the novel rectifies real life. Were the results of Adams' ecstatic moments confined to smoking a pipe, snapping his fingers, and taking a turn or two about the room, one might argue that he lives on a quite separate plane. But the strength with which he restrains Mrs. Tarwoos is part of Adams' own doctrine of good works, where he practically does that to be fully implemented in the present, where he applies that. And it again reiterates the philosophy of Fielding in terms of morality, where practical virtue is far more important than the Christian doctrine. This takes us to chapter 18, and its heading runs as The History of Betty the Chambermaid and an account of what occasioned the violent scene in the preceding chapter. So through the heading we can see that Fielding has established a relationship of the previous chapter with the upcoming chapter, and what happened in the previous chapter is explained further in the context of Betty's life and her background in this chapter, that is chapter 18. This chapter is an elaboration, it is a comment and Fielding's analysis of what happens in chapter 17, so there is not much detail as far as the summary is concerned. However, I would like to point out Fielding's criticism on religion and religious practices through this. The same theme emerges in Fielding's tolerant treatment of Betty and Mr. Tarwoos. Fielding proposes more realistic alternatives to vice. I have done nothing that's unnatural, Betty exclaims, and the violence of Mr. Tarwoos' passion, like water which is stopped from its usual current in one place, naturally sought a vent in another. So what we can notice is that Fielding here is giving justifications these human weaknesses. The strong effect of environment on both Betty and Mr. Tavu again indicates Fielding's concern. Fielding's tone emphasizes that Betty's good nature and compassion are more important than prudish hypocrisy. In this chapter, we can notice the theme of virtue versus chastity. Fielding does not expect the clergy alone to practice charity. Rather, it is a standard that he sets for the citizenry at large. Betty, the chambermaid, is an interesting case in point because Fielding's presentation of her conduct reveals that despite all the uproar in the novel over the virtue of chastity, he in fact prizes charity much more highly. When Joseph arrives at the inn, Betty distinguishes herself through her willingness to assist him in his need. When Mrs. Tavu refuses to supply Joseph with either a shirt or a cup of tea, it is Betty who takes it upon herself to procure these items for him. Her other distinguishing characteristic, however, is her sexual lust and her lack of loyalty towards her sweetheart, John, and there we notice that she shows weakness. So this was the summary of chapter 18, and with this we move towards the end of today's session. In this session, as I said earlier, we have covered from chapter 11 to chapter 18 of book 1. This implies that we have finished book 1 so far. In this session, we not only looked at the headings of these chapters, but also important summary points, and then we had a critical analysis and discussion of these points. Important parts of text with reference to the themes, development of characters, etc. was also discussed, and I hope that by the end of book 1 you are able not only to understand the purpose for which Fielding has written this novel, the main themes that he has presented in these chapters, but also you are able to understand the development of these characters through their movement through different events and happenings. In the next section, we would start book 2 of this novel. With this, we come to the end of today's session. This is the list of the references that I used. Thank you very much.